That's what I like to do in my spare time. I play a little baseball, which I don't think, well, we have a little bit of that here. And I catch, so I get to put on the armor so I can deflect all the things that get thrown at me. This is actually part of kind of a little series I'm starting to roll out, which is trying to overcome some of the misnomers about Scrum, right? Misunderstandings. I hear lots of them all of the time, like you can only deliver once per sprint. I'm not sure where it says that. I've never seen it written, but I hear it all of the time. We have to deliver at least once per sprint, but I can deliver every 2 minutes if I want to using Scrum. So there's a whole bunch of things that I'm going to put out. This is my second time here in New Zealand, and you are the nicest people I've seen around the world. I've traveled all over the world. And last time I was here, I spent my first day in Wellington. So I traveled from the US. I live on the East Coast, landed here, flew down there. So I'd been up for probably 25 hours and said if I go to sleep, I'm really screwed. So just started walking around, going in the bars, going in the restaurants, and just meeting people, talking to people. And everybody talked to me. I didn't have to even start it, so it was a great experience. So I've been at scrum.org for about a year now, and I always throw that little tidbit in there because I find it interesting. I've also built a whole bunch of houses, right? It gets me into architecture, gets me into also dealing with change and owners wanting to change things that you can't really change because now that side of the building falls down and things like that. So it's kind of some fun stuff. Just real quick, a little bit about scrum.org, and I think there's really one important thing right here, which is there's one Scrum guide. Right, so there's lots and lots of people doing Scrum. How many people are doing Scrum or some form of Scrum? Cool. So some of this will be review then. We've got over 90,000 professional Scrum certifications out there. It's about almost 100,000 now. We've got those open assessments. Over 1 million people have taken those open assessments to help them learn and so on. But all of it, again, it's all based on one Scrum guide. And that Scrum guide is small, intentionally small. Right? It's the framework. It's not a process. It's not prescriptive. It's about learning and evaluating what we do and continuing to improve on what we do. Right? Scrum is empirical. We can talk about predictive management, long-term plans, waterfall. We talk about it all the time. But what is Scrum? Right? It's about goals. It's about visions. It's about putting an environment in place for us to be successful. We were just talking before the session. It's common sense. Reality is, when you read the Scrum guide, if you go through a course, you start to implement it, it's just common sense. But if it's not written down, we often forget about common sense. We go back to our old ways of thinking, or the pressures come on and so on. It's really about learning from what we do and continually adapting what we're doing. But again, nowhere in here does it say do not plan. Right? It doesn't say don't plan. There's nowhere that says that. Yet again, that's one of those things I hear all the time. Oh, Scrum means no planning. We just go and do. Well, but it's not true. There we go. A person without a plan just wanders, right? We still need a vision. What is that product we're trying to deliver? What's the market we're going after? What are our objectives? What are our goals? Right? How are we going to sell this thing if it's an external product? If it's internal, how are we going to deploy it? How are our users going to consume it and so on? We need to understand that, or how do we build it? We can't build what we're trying to build if we don't know what we're building. So I can throw a whole bunch of requirements up against the wall, or have a whole bunch of people sit in a room for a sprint planning and just say, oh, well, let's go do some stuff. We need a plan. We need to know what we're going to do. We need to know what we're going to deliver, and we need to deliver against that goal, or that set of goals. Right? Kind of looking at that big picture. I'm glad this actually worked, because it kept collapsing every time I closed the PowerPoint, and then I have to fix it again and again, so thank you. The bigger picture, right? We need that company vision. We need to tie into that vision. We've got a business strategy kind of below it, right? Our product strategy for that product. What are we trying to deliver? We need a roadmap. People aren't going to give us a whole lot of funding if we don't have some sort of a roadmap. Does it need to be a 3-year roadmap? Probably not. But we need to have something there to get the funding, to get the agreement from the business. Certainly some release planning, some sprint planning, and then our daily plan. What are we going to do today? What are we going to accomplish? How are we going to accomplish it? So when I think about agility and the definition of agility, right, the ability to rapidly and deliberately respond to changing demand while controlling risk. Flexibility, the capacity and capability of rapidly and efficiently adapting, and the ability to innovate. What does all of that mean? It means the ability to change. Just because it's written in a plan doesn't mean we have to do it either. Right? We need to be able to learn. That's why sprinting is important. That's why having some set end goals are important, so we can learn and we can adapt. If I learn every second, and I do, I need to think about that. I need to comprehend it. I need to look at it as a bigger picture so that I can start to plan for what I'm going to do next. I need to be able to comprehend what have we done and adjust to that and adapt to that. I need to have those incoming things. What are my competitors doing? What is my market doing? What's sales telling me? But don't have those happy years. It's not all about sales, right? We've all worked for CEOs who have happy years, as I call them, or shiny thing, there goes a squirrel, we need to go build it. Right? It's not about that. It's not about building things or changing things just because somebody said something or heard something or did something. But it's about being able to adapt to changes in the market. It's about being able to build what's most important. Often you hear people talk about, right, fail fast. Well, it's not about failing fast. It's about learning as we're doing so we continually evolve our plans and evolve what we're going to build and continue building that moving forward, right? We want to react, we want to explore, we want to lead and keep going forward. So all of this is based on the Scrum Guide, and like I said, if somebody can find somewhere in the Scrum Guide that says do not plan, please let me know. I do work very closely with Ken and Jeff, and I released the last version of the Scrum Guide for them, so I'll change that. But I don't think it's in there anywhere, right? As a matter of fact, we've got the word plan somewhere on here. Sprint planning, there it is. I can't read. Sprint planning, right? We do plan. Something that's also very important, and I had a conversation with somebody about this today as well, is that little arrow here, refinement. Refinement is continuous planning. We need to continuously plan. I got an email this morning from a lady in the U.S. Air Force. We're not going to make any U.S. jokes today. There were plenty of them in the keynotes. But she said this to me. She said, I'm working with a team. I've got a whole bunch of stakeholders. None of them want to come to our sprint reviews, but they all want to be involved in planning. And they all want individual sessions with me to work on plans, right? Typical mindset, especially military and all of those things. But refinement's the perfect place for that. Refinement's a perfect place to be able to work together with your stakeholders and understand what do we have in our backlog and how are we going to refine that down? What do we need to add? What do we think? What do our stakeholders think are priorities? Now, as a product owner, I need to still make that final decision. Somebody has to be accountable or responsible for it. It's not about a throat to choke. It's not about getting fired. I sometimes joke about that, but it's not about who gets fired if the product fails, but somebody has to be responsible. Somebody has to be delivering. It also doesn't mean in Scrum, it doesn't say anywhere, as a matter of fact, it says the opposite, that the product owner makes all decisions and the product owner is an expert in everything, right? They work with business analysts or product managers or folks that are experts in different areas to help feed that back in and define what that product is and prioritize it. But somebody has to make that call. Because if I go to the development team and we're in sprint planning, and we say, okay, I've got my priorities, you've got your priorities, she's got her priorities. All right, development team or Scrum team, go figure out what you're going to deliver. What are we going to deliver? A mishmash of mess, right? We're not going to deliver on value. It's also not about velocity. I'm so tired of hearing velocity, and Jeff is one of the probably most guilty people around this, talking about hypervelocity. I really don't care about velocity. I care about value. And it's about delivering value on an ongoing basis continuously. And a big part of that plan is looking at what's going to deliver the most value and helping to prioritize that. Now, there's lots of other factors, as we know, like architecture changes and other things that play into value, and I've got to balance that as a product owner. But as I'm planning, I'm going to think about how am I going to deliver value? And don't, please, I had this conversation with someone yesterday, please don't compare two teams based on velocity. Don't do it. because my velocity in my team is very different than your velocity in your team. And I don't care how well we're trained on it, we all have different opinions of what an 8 is, or a 10 is, or a 28.3 is, and all of those things, right? It's not about that. And oh, by the way, if you're going to bonus me on that, I guarantee you I will game that system, and everything is a 3 or everything is a 23, depending on how I'm trying to game the system, right? It's about value and what value am I bringing, and we need to plan around that. We need to build that out. So Scrum likes planning, right? At a minimum, sprint planning, daily scrums, can be planning throughout, right? As we just talked about. Refinement is really important. And I recommend that we do refinement at least once every sprint. Now, sprint planning also doesn't mean throw it all into the sprint backlog and say this is what we're going to deliver this sprint. I can plan just enough to get started and continue to pull things in. Now, part of product ownership is making sure that I prioritize that product backlog so that my Scrum team can pull in as they continue. But I can start here, right? I can start with these are the things that we're going to work on as a Scrum team. And over those 2 weeks or 4 weeks or 1 week, whatever that sprint time frame is, I can pull more things in. Now, we need to prioritize those. Otherwise, I'm pulling from down here and up here and all over the place, and I'm not meeting my goals. But we can deliver what we're trying to deliver as a team and not have to have it all in the box, because you're never going to deliver everything if you try to put it all in that box. So some reasons for planning as needed. There's lots of different things, right? And what we need to overcome when we're dealing with this, what we need to overcome within our teams, and something that I think is really important is there's this trust factor. Does anybody work in an organization where whatever you want to do, you could do, all of management, because there's still management, we're not flattening every organization in the world, trusts you, trusts your team, and just says, you know what, go off, figure out what you want to do, go deliver it, and let us know when you're ready. Anyone? Darn, I always have my resume ready just in case. But that's not the reality, right? We work in different types of organizations. Now, sometimes there's a project or a product that we get involved in that's already funded. Trust is there. There's an inventory for the next several sprints, and we're ready to go. That's cool. That's pretty simple, right? Unfunded new project with history, right? We trust in the history exists, so there's some trust there. But we still need to figure out what we're going to build and prioritize it and so on. Unfunded new project with history. The history could be bad. It could be good. Trust may be there, it may not be there. And then the last one, right? Unfunded new project and distrust. Well, if we're going to go walk in and say, oh, you know what, we're doing Scrum. I'm ready to do this project. I'm not going to tell you what we're going to build. We really don't do planning. We just kind of figure it out as we go along. How long do you think that project is going to last? Exactly, right? It's not. We need to put those plans in place. But we need to do planning as needed. We may need more planning down here because we need to build that trust. And then over time, we can start to work our way up as we're building the trust, as we're building the inventory, as we're building out our project backlog, as we're starting to prove that we can deliver sprint after sprint after sprint and so on. So Scrum delivers frequently, right? It's not about, like I said in the beginning, it's not about once per sprint. It's interesting, and we're talking with Ken and trying to work on actually changing the framework a little bit. So if you think back to that bigger one, you have increment and then sprint review. Sprint review is not a gate for delivery and delivery of that increment. Sprint review is to review what happened within that sprint. I deliver without that gate. It's not a gate, and I can deliver over and over and over and over again within that. And it helps to prevent that, what we'd call the cone of uncertainty, right? The cone of uncertainty, as I am further away, I know less about a project. I know less about a product, my timelines, when I'm going to deliver, how I'm going to deliver, and so on. The smaller those increments, it's much easier to predict what I'm going to do, how I'm going to do it, and what I'm going to do. So it's really important to understand that. Now, a sprint in Scrum, and I've kind of talked about this a bit already, but it's time boxed. It's about getting development done. That definition of done, I believe, is really important. And it's not about defining the done product. It's what is it to be a feature to be done, or a product backlog item to be done. And certainly, what is it for that sprint to be done? Because we easily can, I didn't get to that. That's all right. We'll do that next time. Right? It's about holding our team accountable and making sure that we're planning for the right things. And don't start pulling the next backlog item, because you know what, that stuff there, that's not the fun stuff. I only want to work on the cool, fun stuff, so I'm just going to call this done. I'm going to push that, on my board over and start pull the next backlog item, even though I didn't really accomplish done. One of the things I do on the Scrum team that I'm the product owner of is we define done criteria for our different backlog items. And it's really about making sure that we know all the things that need to be done. It's part of my refinement process. Right? It's about making sure that we've detailed the features or the capabilities that need so that the development team has it. Now, again, there's another one, and this is another presentation I need to build, which is a product owner doesn't come in at the beginning of the sprint and then show up for the sprint review. Right? It's communication. This is another one I hear all the time. And, our product owner, they came, we did planning, and then they weren't happy when they came to the sprint review and we didn't deliver what they expected. Well, did you all have a conversation? Did you work together? As the development team or as the developer who pulled this backlog item that you didn't quite understand, did you just go and say, well, I assume this is what he or she meant, so I'm just going to go build it? Or did you go back to the product owner and say, hey, what does this really mean? Can we refine this? Can we define it better? Can I make sure I understand? Because make customer available means many, many different things. And you talked about when you introduced me that I wrote a book on UML, and please don't boo me for that. But one of the things, and one of the most important things that came out of that for me was, and I write about it in the book, a picture tells 1,000 words, but it's a different 1,000 words depending on who looks at that picture. Right? And I need to define that. I need to have that plan. I need to have that clarity within that, or we're all going to interpret it differently. If I throw up a picture, right, if I just went back one and throw up that picture, we're going to probably interpret that thing differently. That's why the Scrum Guide has the descriptions within that. Well, I need those descriptions to make sure that I'm building the right thing that my team understands. But by the way, if it's not there, don't just wing it. Ask. It's supposed to be a Scrum team, and the product owner is part of that Scrum team. It's not a Scrum individual. Right? We're part of that team. That planning meeting, right? The definition of done I talked about, right? The development team working together, the product backlog feeding, there's retrospective commitments and so on. But it's really about meeting at the end. What is my goal? And I heard, I think it was yesterday, someone talked about, well, let's pick our product backlog items and pull them into our sprint backlog, and then let's define our goal. Well, if I don't define my goal up front of what it is I want to deliver and what I'm thinking about delivering as a product owner, what am I planning? How do I make sure that I'm pulling in the right things? I might just have a whole bunch of random stuff. Might be cool, might not. But what's my goal? What are we trying to deliver together to pull that in? And maybe I need to make some changes. Maybe I need to do some things different. On the one team that I work with, we'll sometimes go down to 1-week sprints instead of 2-week sprints because we have certain goals that we're trying to meet. And we'll adjust it to meet those goals. And it's amazing how much can get done when we put the pressure on a little bit sometimes too, right? We can get a little bit more done when we really are trying to hit those goals. But if I don't know the goal, how do I focus on that goal? How do I define that, and how do I build that going forward? So the product backlog holds the requirements in Scrum, right? I don't think, does anybody argue with that? Right? I don't think anybody disagrees with that. Right? It's the inventory for what needs to be done and so on. As I go further and further along within my backlog, right, I go from, these are really nicely refined, and I get bigger and bigger items. Because I'm building that out. Has anybody read the Nexus guide? A couple? Cool. So the Nexus Guide is something that Ken Schwaber put together around how do I scale Scrum. It's not about how do I change my whole organization. It's about how do I take one Scrum team and have multiple Scrum teams working together to deliver on a single product. And there's a lot in there that he talks about, and talking about, right, I can still do longer term planning, but as I get further out, I get less defined, right? Because I don't know what all of those things are yet until I get further and further along. And that backlog, so as you can see, right, as I'm building it out, I know what sprint 1 is, and that's pretty clear. I kind of know what I'm going to have in sprints 2 and sprint 3. They're a little bit bigger because they're maybe not as well refined. I don't know what I missed in sprint 1. I also don't know what's new that might come in. Right, maybe I get a bug that comes in. Maybe I get something else. Maybe there's some huge requirement from our biggest customer that although I don't like those happy ears, I have no choice, but I have to deliver. Do we prioritize that into our backlog? How do we break that down and so on as part of that planning process and break that down? And then sprint 4, you don't want to plan out too far. But in sprint 4, we kind of know and have an idea of what we're going to do. Again, that might change over time. It's not a commitment, right? But it is a goal. It is a plan. So the product backlog supports emergent architecture development. Right? Architectures are important. We don't have a hardening sprint. We don't have an architectural sprint. I've got a designer as part of my Scrum team. And during our sprints, he'll do design work, and we'll implement that design work. How many times have you seen, right, this great JPEG that looks really, really, really cool, and then 2 months later we implement it, and it's nothing like what we thought? Because it's really easy to do stuff in Photoshop, not quite as easy to do it in code. And it doesn't look the same, it doesn't act the same, it doesn't react. Right? There's nothing better than to get that feedback immediately. I work with my design team, or my designer that's on my Scrum team, and the development team, and he'll design something, and then one of our developers will implement that, and be like, oh, yeah, that looked really cool, but now, wow, that gap is really big because now I'm scrolling, or wow, the words, it just doesn't work, right? So being able to implement that more quickly and get that constant feedback is what's important in delivering those pieces. Every sprint still must deliver at least one piece of functionality within, right? We're not changing that. There's different techniques for what we'll call planning or sizing, right? Some use them, we talked a little about it just now, right? Planning poker, again, a 3 to me is maybe a 5 to you and maybe a 20 to somebody else. That's okay. And there's lots of techniques. I've talked to a lot of people who use t-shirt sizing. Instead, there's an of there missing, right? Affinity estimation, counting PBIs, doing function points. It doesn't really matter how we size. What's important is that we plan things out and that we can start to measure our team's progress. It's not a competition against other teams to deliver more. Because what is more? How do you define more? Who defines that more? And please don't start pitting teams up against each other. I don't ever want to walk in, and I have, so I shouldn't say this, but walk into an organization where they start to show velocity of the different teams on the board, and they start comparing, and someone gets the Amex gift card or Amazon gift card because their team delivered more velocity. Right? I've seen this, and it causes really bad behaviors, and it's not delivering on value. What are we delivering for the organization that really delivers that value? We can report progress against the plan, right? Backlog items, releases, analysis of changes, estimates, and so on. But it's really, really important to look at kind of the value. What value am I delivering as I move forward, and how am I planning for that? I know this was a really short session. I apologize. Right, so in conclusion, you should always start with a vision. Let's have that vision. What are we trying to build? What is our goal of the product, and what are we trying to do? Visualize that product backlog. It gives you transparency, right? Whether you're using Jira, which I use in some cases, I use Trello in other cases, right? Having that visualization helps the team understand what we're doing, what we're working on, and the progress that we're making. I've yet to find a perfect tool. If someone finds one, let me know. Product backlog holds all work for the product, but it's constantly evolving. So all the work today is not all the work tomorrow. Some gets done, some gets added in, and we continually evolve that. Product backlog is a living artifact, making refinement very, very important. Product backlog holds all the information, forecasting, etc. Sprint backlog is planned work for the current sprint. And so I pull from my product backlog into my sprint backlog, and you can always add more work during the sprint. You didn't define it and say this is it. Thank you.